Hello, testing, testing.
Hi, good afternoon. We can hear you.
Hello?
Thank you.
And I think everyone's here. Welcome, Director Weiner. Then we can get the party started. Ms. Martinez, all yours.
Okay, great. And just a quick roll call. Director Weiner
I am present.
and Chair Cepeda.
Here.
Thank you. Next item, public comment. Items not on the agenda. I did not receive any written request for public comment, and I do not see any attendees on our Zoom call. Next item, matters from staff and general manager. The first item is minutes, accept the minutes of the April 12th, 2021, May 10th, 2021, June 21st, 2021, and July 20th, 2021 Finance and Administration Committee meetings.
I move we accept the minutes with one correction to the 412 minutes. Add a space between the word were, W-E-R-E, and chair in the first item.
Thank you, noted.
Great. Thank you. Then I'll go ahead and second it. And unless there's any discussion, then we'll move on to the vote. Director Weiner, or Ms. Martinez.
We actually don't need a vote. Is that correct, Claire?
We can just by
Yeah, we
acclamation.
can move on to the next one.
That's
Perfect.
correct. If there's no objection, that'll be the order.
Perfect. Then
Thank
next
you.
item.
Next item, bond overview, presentation and overview of documents and associated agreements for the West County Facilities Finance Authority 2021 wastewater revenue bonds.
All right, Chair Cepeda, if you mind, I can go ahead and start our brief presentation. So good afternoon. So Justin Lovell, the Director of Administrative Services. So as you're aware, as the committee, we're moving very rapidly to be able to have all the agreements and documents in order to be able to issue bonds to finance our energy services contract that the board just approved last week, as well as some other capital projects. And so on this call this afternoon, I have Mernal Shaw with Best and Krieger, who is our bond counsel, and Christian Sprunger with NHA Advisors, who is our municipal advisor. And you saw them at our committee meeting last month, when we discussed the Joint Powers Financing Authority, which subsequently the board has approved. And the last Thursday, the California, the CSCDA approved the JP as well. And so we'll be working to execute that agreement over this week and to have to be able to finalize the formation of the financing authority, which will be the authority that will be actually approving the bonds, but the West County Wastewater Board of Directors will also be approving many of these agreements. And so today we wanted to provide an overview to the Finance Administration Committee, all the different agreements and the relationship between each of the different parties that will be needed to be approved to issue bonds. And so there are, in the brief staff report I provided, there are several agreements and documents. We also provided drafts of those agreements that will be going to the board and to the Financing Authority Board, which is one and the same, but just legally, two different boards. That we're planning to go to the August 18th board meeting. So at this point, I'll pass it off to Mernal, who will and Christian will be giving a brief overview of the different agreements, what their purposes are, and we can answer any questions that the committee may have.
Good afternoon, everyone. Christian and I thought it would be great to start with the overview, which you saw, the slide overview that you saw at the board meeting, and build from there. So Christian, would you mind sharing your screen? And it'll help show
Certainly.
the flow of the agreements and how the parties work in relation to the agreements.
Okay, I believe I've started sharing my screen. Let me know if you can or cannot see it.
We can see it now. Yes.
Great. Let me go to full screen mode. All right, and it's dated and has all the information as if this was for the board meeting, since this is effectively the same thing we'd plan on showing to the board. So just wanted to make that comment. There you go, Mrinal.
Mrinal, you're muted.
Thank you. We started at the top at the last meeting between the relationship between West County Wastewater District and California Statewide Communities Development Authority. As you may recall, the JPA is allowed to issue bonds directly without a voter approval vote, and it's more economical for the district to join in a joint powers authority to issue the bonds. So that's what happened at the last board meeting. Is the joint powers authority was approved, and the document governing that was the joint exercise of powers agreement. And the West County Facilities Financing Authority has been created. Now, in the second stage, the financing authority is going to issue the bonds, and that will be done through a indenture of trust. Pursuant to the indenture of trust, the terms and conditions of the bonds are set forth, and the trustee basically holds all the funds and accounts that will be paid out. So there will be a acquisition fund, and from that fund, the district will draw all of its costs for the improvements. There will be a fund where there's a bond repayment fund. So debt service payments will be held in those funds. The bonds are sold to an underwriter. And so the underwriter will enter into an agreement with the district and the authority, and that agreement is called the bond purchase agreement. So then the underwriter will pay the trustee the bond proceeds, and those will be held under the indenture of trust and governed pursuant to its terms and conditions. The repayment source for the bonds are installment payments, and those are set forth between the district and the authority. So the authority acquires the improvements, but under the agency agreement, it appoints the district as its agent to acquire the improvements, and the district will hold title to all of the improvements. The district, in return for the financing monies, will promise to make installment purchase payments. So to purchase the improvements on an installment payment plan to repay the debt of the bonds. And that serves as security for the payment of the bonds. Now, the pledge for the installment payments is our net revenues of the district. So that's essentially your gross revenues less operating and maintenance costs. And that is the basic structure and how the legal documents work. I'll pause there and take any questions.
Director Wiener, any questions so far?
I have lots of questions. I can wait to ask them, or
Do you have any questions about what she's talked about so far? Or are they questions?
Yeah.
Presentation?
Well, I do. I'm having a hard time understanding what's purchased and what's paid for. It sounds like the district is purchasing payments. Is that what the district is actually purchasing? And what, if anything, is the WCFFA purchasing or selling?
So the WCFFA is purchasing the improvements that the district is going to construct. And then the district, and they're purchasing it in a lump sum by issuing the bonds. The bonds will be issued at a principal amount where all of the money that the district will need to finance its improvements will be placed into the trust. So the WCFFA, the authority, is purchasing the improvements. Now the district will make payments to acquire those improvements from the authority.
Okay, that sort of makes some sense. Not that the documents made a lot of sense to me. Let's see. For the moment, I think that's, in general, going forward, I would like to see a summary of all the risks and possible liabilities that these documents place the district in. Just a summary and a simple explanation. Possibly, as I was reading through, I could see lots of potential things that could happen to the district should they not do certain things, and certain things that we were restricted from. So I guess I would like to understand the risk of going into this process. And yeah, so that's my opening thought on reading all the documents. Was I would like some another document that, I mean, in the summary that you gave to describe all the documents we were to look at. I would like to see that also included in that summary, something talking about the risks of borrowing this money.
Sure, no problem. We can add that in.
That would be good. Okay, yeah, let's go on and I'll ask questions at a more appropriate time.
Okay.
Thank you, Director Wiener. And Justin, would you mind reminding us what the question is going to be at the next board meeting? What exactly are we looking to approve?
You're looking to approve the financing and all of the documents associated with the financing. And this will be the final step for approval of the bonds.
Right. So it'll be under one kind of resolution, one staff report that will be requesting that there's going to be two actions. There will be the actions of the West County Wastewater Board of Directors. They'll be approving, the agency agreement, installment purchase agreement. I don't know, Mrinal, would they also be approving the bond purchase agreement?
Yes.
Yes. So then that as the board for West County Wastewater would approve certain agreements, and then the board of the financing authority would then go and approve those same agreements plus the indenture of trust agreement, because the financing authority will be the actual legal authority that is going to be purchasing or going to be issuing the bonds and receiving the proceeds.
Thank you.
And if I may briefly, as Mrinal touched on, she mentioned that the primary pledge here is a net revenue pledge. That's the primary pledge that the district is making, is that gross revenues of this system, less the operation and maintenance expenses, will result in net revenues sufficient to pay the bonds and to provide us what's known as the coverage. I think we discussed this in April or March, the coverage calculation, but there's a coverage that bond investors want to see on top of the debt service payment. So the number that we're targeting is a 1.2 times, which means for every dollar in debt service, there's $1.20 of net revenues to pay that. Of course, the district only pays $1 in debt service, but the $1.20 is the coverage. It's the buffer, the cushion, if you will, for the investor. And so that's the primary pledge here. There are other pledges in the documents, but the primary one is that what's securing the bonds is these repayments, and that the district will maintain coverage as needed by either reducing expenses, increasing rates, but that the district will maintain that coverage. We've done some projections and some calculations. The district hired the rate consultant to do some very robust projections, and we don't anticipate any issues in the next several years with that covenant. In addition, that covenant is a standard covenant for bond issuances similar to this. So utility bond issues, wastewater bonds in this case. It's a pretty standard covenant with those bonds. And so investors have a certain expectation, if you will, with that covenant. So the primary covenant the district is making is that net revenue pledge. That's the security for the bonds that the bond investors are going to be keeping an eye on.
And let me
Yeah.
just add to that,
Okay.
you know, when we use this word in our business, which is covenant, and all a covenant is I mean, not all, but a covenant is a promise. So that's a promise we're making in our bond documents, which are contract documents. So all of these things, while they're within the framework of a whole set of laws, they're ultimately grounded in what these contracts are, and they set up the relationships. And so we'll talk about how, and Director Weiner, you asked about the risks. In a way, this is also an insurance, because we say when we make these bond covenants, these promises that we're going to keep a 1.2 coverage ratio, we have promises to the bondholders that we're going to take certain actions as a district to make sure that we have enough net revenue in order to pay the bonds. And that is a critical issue for us, because we have a contractual duty to the bondholders to maintain sufficient revenues to pay the bonds back. I don't see that as a risk. I see that as a big benefit. And we have never had a rate challenge to my knowledge, but that is something that goes into the thinking behind what the risks are. And when we can say to our ratepayers, we do need to maintain a certain level of revenue in order to continue to pay back these bonds, which are ultimately paying for infrastructure that they benefit from.
Thank you all for your answers. Thank you. I have no other questions.
So in order to sell the bonds, the district has to basically provide investors with a prospectus that describes information about the bonds, the sources for repayment, the district, and its wastewater enterprise. And this is contained in the document, which is known as the official statement. The official statement is governed under regulations of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. And the rules basically state that the official statement should not contain any information that is misleading or omit any material information. And so while we have worked with staff for, I think, about 2 months now to make this statement as comprehensive as possible, the board also has a responsibility to review the official statement and make sure that there's nothing contained in the official statement which is misleading, or if you have any information that you think is material to the official statement, that should be included in that. And I've listed some of the questions that you may want to ask yourself while you're reviewing the official statement. Is there something that you as an elected official may be aware of, or that you have a different perspective on, that should be considered and disclosed in the preliminary official statement? Is there something is there some information about the district and its operation, its revenue sources, tax base that you think should be disclosed? Is there any pending or threatened litigation against the district that could have a negative impact on the finances? And Claire and I have discussed the outstanding litigation as of now to determine whether or not that would be material. And I think based on our conversation, you have 2 cases outstanding, which are not, which would not have a material impact on the district's ability to repay the bonds. And then, you know, are there any circumstances that are unfolding behind the scenes that you know about that should be disclosed that may affect either the management of the district, operations, repayment of the bonds? So those are questions to keep in the back of your mind when going through and reading the official statement. And if there is something that you feel should be disclosed, please bring it to our attention as soon as possible.
And I'll speak briefly about the schedule, giving a high level. This is I think we've seen this now several times, and we keep seeing it progress, which is a good thing. So where we're at today is the committee review and potential approval to go before the board for the approval of the financing and the documents. We're targeting doing that the 18th, after which point we would go for credit rating calls with the rating agencies. So these are third-party rating agencies. S&P Global Ratings and Moody's Investor Services are the 2 that we'll be having discussions with. They'll provide a rating on the bonds, and then once that process is complete, the preliminary official statement that Runal was just referring to, that will be put out onto the street for investors to begin reviewing and making a decision whether or not to invest in the bonds. Would anticipate a bond sale and closing in September, so a bond sale sometime around the middle of September, and then a closing near the end. It's the high level of the last couple of steps on this issuance process.
Great. So I think, I mean, at this point, we've provided a high-level overview of what will be going to the board. I guess, are there any additional questions or discussion that we would need to have from the committee?
Harry?
Yeah, okay, so I was going through the documents and I came across a lot of text, which I don't know, I wondered about. So I recall that a special district had 2 choices of kind of organization it would be chartered as. And I don't recall the particular formulation of municipal corporation, which I saw as describing the district as a municipal corporation. I don't think it was one of the choices, but this was, yeah, can the board have its memory refreshed to this technicality? I know we have been defined as something. We had 2 choices at the time we chartered, and I don't think either was a corporation. They were called something different. So, yeah, do you want to answer them as I go along, or?
Let's do that as we go along.
Okay.
Let me just say, I prefer us to be known as a sanitary district formed under the Sanitary District Act of 1923. I prefer to not use the municipal corporation terminology because that often just refers to cities, but is there any reason, Mernal, why we need to keep the municipal corporation language in here?
We don't. It refers to cities and public agencies in general, I think. So we can change the municipal corporation to a sanitary district. We'll make that change.
Great. Let's see. What is a parity obligation? Can you describe that to a totally ignorant person?
Well, a parity obligation is additional debt that is issued with the same revenue stream and in the same priority as the bonds that are being issued. So say you wanted to complete more of your capital improvement plan and you decided you needed $30 million, an additional $30 million, and you wanted to bond for that. Those bonds would likely be issued as parity debt if you meet that, 120 coverage on your wastewater revenues. And that would mean that those bonds would be paid just as these bonds are being paid in the same priority and from the same revenue stream.
And in addition to what Mernal said about a potential future issuances down the road, currently the SRF debt that's outstanding is parity debt. So that's considered to have the same level of obligation on the net revenues, the same level of claim on the net revenues.
So I read that there was an order to this. So I think this debt obligation wants to claim priority over any subsequent parity obligation. Is that correct? Even if coverage is good, they would still make a claim that, okay, our bonds are paid for before your newer bonds. Is that?
No, it depends on, it would be paid at the same level as subsequent bonds if they're issued on parity. However, there's also the authority in the documents to issue bonds at a subordinate level. And so if you wanted to issue subordinate debt, then these bonds would, along with the SRF loan, would be paid first. And then, the investor in the subordinate debt assumes that risk because that risk is disclosed to them that they have a subordinate bond and will be paid after these bonds. There is a promise, a covenant in the documents that priority debt won't be issued, so that there won't be any debt that gets priority over these bonds and the SRF loans.
So obviously, if you have a subordinate debt, it will cost more to borrow.
Yes.
Higher interest rate, correct. Investors expect a higher return for that greater risk.
When will the board know the actual cost interest amounts that the authority will encumber the district with?
So that happens on the pricing date, and Christian can tell you more about that process.
Yes, so after the preliminary official statement is approved by the board, and then we have the ratings from the credit rating agencies, we put the preliminary official statement out on the street. It will be marketed to investors by the underwriter, and then there will be a day when the actual orders come in, and then we would fix the interest rates on that day. So you'll know on the pricing day. Right now, we're estimating middle of September, and at that point, once they're fixed, even though we won't close for about 2 weeks after that, the rates won't be moving. The rate risk is effectively gone at that point.
I've asked, I forget, it might have been you, Christian, about the current market. And you said it was favorable, but it's a moving target. I'm wondering if the board can get some preview, follow along and see where we're at so we can have some a little bit of expectation about how much it's going to cost and where our rates are going.
Certainly. So we'll be providing a refresh of where the market's at when we come before the board on the 18th. We'll be saying, here are what we call the good faith estimates, is where we believe that you'll be at when it comes to pricing. And so we can certainly provide that. And then the market has continued to stay favorable since we spoke last. Interest rates are remaining low. They moved up very slightly this last week, but they move up and down from week to week slightly, but overall they're staying fairly low. So,
And Christian, I think it'd be helpful to give the background of how many weeks, or actually, it's been several years that rates have stayed low, correct?
that's correct. Yeah, the rates have stayed low. They are currently near historic lows. If you look at I don't have a chart to show you at this very moment, so I apologize for that. But if you look at the 10-year history of the municipal market index, what's used to set the rates on municipal bonds, has been trending downward for the past 10 years. And for the past year or so, it's been hugging the bottom.
Just as a side note, I read an article that said no one knows why. So there you go. I also wanted to bring up present circumstances at the federal level. Right now, I would like to see the district be prepared to take advantage of infrastructure money should it become available, which is, it seems every day to be in doubt, or for sure, or in doubt, or for sure. But I'd like us to be prepared to contact our congressperson on how to apply for these funds if they are for wastewater, greenhouse gas reduction, carbon sequestration, or CO2 emission reduction, so that we take a little bit of risk out of taking on all this debt if the opportunity arises. So I just wanted to say that. I had that thought while reading all this legalese. Does the board give up district control of district finances if they are unable to meet, if the district is unable to meet conditions set forth in the purchase agreement?
So could you clarify what you mean, give up control? That, from my perspective, there's always control by the district over the finances. It's you have to pay your debt service when due, and if you fail to meet those covenants, you're in breach, and there will be legal remedies that the bond owners can exercise, which are outlined in the events of default under the indenture.
Yeah, it looked like to me as I was reading it, and of course, what am I? I mean, I have no expertise in all this legalese, but it looked like there would be a trustee would take over the district, or there would be some sort of person assigned to be in charge of the district should we default on that.
So the trustee is actually holds the funds that are within the indenture of trust for the benefit of the bond owners. So there's nobody that will come into the district and take over the district's finances. This is the trustee that is being appointed to oversee the bond. So should there be an event of failure by the district to bond, or a catastrophe where you can no longer operate your wastewater system, the trustee will be the one that represents the bond owners in ensuing remedies against the district, but it doesn't take over the district's finances or operations.
What is this was a real eye-opener to me, the waiver of law clause, which says that if a law is passed which is favorable to the district regarding the bond debt, the district cannot take advantage of it. This is a standard thing that appears in clauses. Oh, here's a law. this really helps you with your debt. No, you can't take advantage of it.
So I think what it's designed to do is, you're entering into a contract with these bonds. And if there's something in the law that say lets you just get rid of your obligations to repay the debt or maintain your rate covenant, then that seems to be, unfair to bond purchasers because they come in, you're representing, you're going to provide them with X, Y, and Z, and you're then saying, hey, wait, there's a new law. We don't have to pay you if we don't want to repay your debt. And so that's what that provision is designed to do. It is to basically solidify the agreements that the district and the authority are making in order to induce investors to purchase the bonds.
That seems, that seems pretty extreme to me. That the government's laws will not be enforced. And who would enforce that clause? It would just go to the courts?
It would likely have to go to the courts. But I think, if you state that, any of the covenants and what the district has agreed to do under the documents are subject to, being set aside by future laws, which are favorable, I think you would have a difficult time getting purchasers to purchase the bonds. And Christian, you may be able to talk about this a bit more.
Yeah, I think that pardon me, that clause is not necessarily talking about whether or not the district would repay. I mean, of course it applies to it, but that would be a pretty extreme situation where somehow a change of law meant that bonds didn't have to be repaid. I think it's probably practically applying to some smaller covenant, practically speaking. And so, as Mrinal said, telling investors, well, we're going to take your money today, but if the law changes in our favor to where we don't have to repay you in the extreme case that was brought up, that would make it very difficult to sell bonds to investors. There would be a lot of risk there for them.
Since in my view, the bondholders control the government, I just don't think there's any risk of this happening. So, why is there a federal loan guarantee clause? I didn't quite understand what that was trying to do.
Which document is it in?
I'm pretty sure it's in the purchase, the conditions for the bond in every
The bond purchase agreement.
yeah, I think it's there, but I think it gets replicated everywhere because it seemed to me as I was reading the documents, they were pretty much contained a copy of the purchase agreement in other contexts. So
I will need to pull that document up.
and does this came to me as I was reading all this, does the district risk being privatized if they default under the definitions?
No.
Okay. Yeah, and all these conditions, is there a possibility of having a simplified list so that all of the verbiage around what they're trying to get at can be understood? I felt like, what does this really mean was basically my question. I mean, it seemed like when you look at the summary or the statement, it makes sense. But then when I read all of the verbiage, it was like, oh, what's actually going on here? So if that could be possible, that would help my fellow board members, I'm sure.
And so would you like a high level of just an outline of what your covenants are and your responsibilities?
Yeah.
Okay,
That would make it a lot easier because I was going through this document trying to figure that out. And I found it to be, or these documents, there's 5 of them and 217 pages of legal language. So I saw no reference to our PSLA, just a reference to prevailing wages. I wonder if we could find a way to replace prevailing wages with wages defined by the PSLA, some verbiage to that effect. Since we just signed a project labor agreement with, and it will be applied to the project that we will be purchasing. Or
Yes, I don't know, Mernal, if you have a thought on this. I mean, the specific language about the the wages for the contractors was drawn out in the energy services contract that the board has just approved. So I believe Director Wiener is asking because there's mention of prevailing wages within the documents. So I don't know if there is kind of any risk or changing that, or what's your thought on that possibility? That's kind of what his question is.
Let me take a look at that. Justin, if you could provide me with a brief write-up on that, and I can review the documents to see if we need to change out the references.
Okay. I think Director Wiener, you are on mute.
I think it was just defining costs to the bondholders. And one of them, of course, is labor. And so sort of an estimate of what we would be paying. And since our agreement determines that more than prevailing wages, it might be of interest.
Director Wiener, I've looked up the bond purchase agreement. I don't see references to federal loan, but there are a number of references to federal tax exemption requirements. Is that perhaps what you're referring to?
No, I think it's headed Federal Loan Guarantee.
Okay. And that's in the,
Oh, is it possible that that's in the indenture under the permitted investments for the funds? That might be what you're referring to.
Yeah, that's probably what it's referring to.
Yeah, it says you can't have it, whatever. And I was curious to know what that is and why.
Okay, yeah. So that is, there are a number of investments that the funds held under the trust are permitted to be invested in. This goes beyond the scope of the government code's authorized investments because the government code expressly allows funds under indenture of trust to be invested pursuant to the terms and conditions of the indenture of trust. So there is a definition of permitted investments, which allows for certain investments to be entered into to hold the funds under the indenture. But it may also expressly prohibit certain other types of investments.
So since this is in a section that has nothing to do with anything we're going to do, since we're not going to invest those funds, or
well, Christian could speak to the investments, but I would think that some of the monies will be invested.
Yeah, I need to be careful because I'm not a registered investment advisor. I'm a municipal advisor, but likely there will be some investment of the project funds. And the idea is that it's in the indenture trust, the permitted investments, what the trustee can invest the district's money in. It's a pretty narrow and pretty safe list of assets. The idea being that you don't want to risk, losing a lot of principal, a lot of value in the accounts due to some sort of risky investment. So it's the idea is to keep the money safe, more or less, and liquid.
So this is a restriction on the trustee.
what they
And-
can't, sorry,
Yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead, I'm sorry.
what they can invest the district's money in. So this is the district's money, the money in the accounts that have been set up. One of the accounts, though, would be the bond repayment account. And so that money would eventually be going to the bond owners. So, but it's the goal is to make the investment options very restrictive and very safe. So liquid and safe are generally the two objectives there.
So, okay, well, just what comes to my mind is that a federal loan guarantee is the kind of safest possible investment, but I could be wrong. What do I know? And then how do repurchase agreements figure into the bond issuance plan? Is that also is that also a restriction on the trustee?
Yes, yes.
Okay, yeah, I didn't get that. I didn't get the connection between all those clauses, and this was what the trustee has to do.
It
And
takes a
so-
while to learn the different parts and the agreements, so even for us professionals,
sure
it took us
it's even
years.
I like that you guarantee that it's possible to learn. What is sinking account redemption also part of the trustee's restrictions?
No, so what the sinking fund redemption is, there may be bonds that are issued as term bonds, meaning they don't mature every year. They may mature in blocks of 5 years. And so monies will be put into that sinking fund to pay the principal and interest as due for each sinking fund maturity.
And the reason, sorry, Director, you're muted.
Let me try to rephrase that. We could decide we have a 5-year term and everything's due at the end of 5 years. We could decide to prepay, add money to or give money to the person that's holding all the cash ahead of time, so that by the time the period is done, we've got enough money in the account to pay that. Is that what a sinking account redemption would be?
So when the bonds are sold to investors, there's kind of two types of bonds. There's serial bonds, which mature every year, and then there's term bonds, which mature periodically. Mrinal gave the example of 5 years. It could be 10 years. It could be 7 years. Really, it's a function of the market, what they demand, and what results in the best pricing, the best sale of the bonds. And so if a term bond is used, what will go along with it is a sinking fund payment schedule. So there will be a set schedule for payments that are to pay down that term bond every year. And that will be set at the pricing, and every investor who buys a bond that matures within that term bond's time period will know to expect possibly that their bonds will be called during that time period.
And just to add on, I think our responsibility as a district, we're obligated to pay the semi-annual debt service payments, and that's going to be fixed. And so as a district, we pay that amount and then give it to the trustee bank. We deposit it in the account, and then the trustee will distribute as necessary, so they can make the repayments according to the different terms of the bonds.
Oh, so our obligation will be different than the trustee's obligation in terms of bond payment.
Correct.
So we're committed to semi-annual payments, and we don't need to concern ourselves with sinking account redemption or anything. That the trustee will deal with that.
Okay. So your
Other than it
yeah.
it determines the cost of our bonds.
Your obligation is essentially to make payments on, Christian, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but is it May 15th and
Correct.
November
for the-
15th?
Correct, for the June and
each
December.
year? Yeah.
And the trustee will send a notification and an invoice to the district ahead of that, when it's due, so the district can pay it in a timely manner.
And that's contained in the installment purchase agreement, those dates and that obligation.
I'm sorry for being so curious.
Not at all.
Okay.
This is
And
great.
so I just have two more statements. I mean, questions, really. I saw a reference to getting payments extended in one of the documents, and it was on page 26, but of course, each document has its own table of contents, and it wasn't clear from the numbering in all of the documentation what it says on page 26 regarding that. And I was curious to know what that is. What does it say about,
Is it
if
section
we're
6?
in financial trouble and we want to ask for a delay in payment? What does it say about that?
Well, typically the extension of payment is usually if there is a missed payment, then it gets kind of tacked on or extended towards the back of the schedule, like you can have it pushed back. I think if you wanted to essentially extend the timeline out, you'd probably have to restructure the bonds in some manner. And Christian can provide a bit more detail on that. But the time is intended to be fixed. It's just, if there were missed payments, that the indenture doesn't terminate right then, it would terminate after the payments are made.
Okay, so
I think-
that's
I
all
think-
that section said, because I couldn't find it. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate, which I think I've said more than once now. I was pretty overwhelmed by the amount of verbiage and cannot say with any assuredness that I understand the depth and breadth of what the board is committing the ratepayers to by borrowing this money. So any help that you can give the board in the presentation that you're going to give in a week would be really great, and I would appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're looking for feedback as to what you want to know and hear about. So this is very helpful.
Yeah, Director Weiner, I think at the highest level, there's definitely more pieces that we could tack onto it, but we're really committing to making the repayments, according to the timeline, and that we're going to maintain a certain debt coverage ratio. So we'll have certain net revenues over that period of time to be able to show that we're meeting our obligations, our operation and maintenance obligations, plus we have a little bit of extra revenue at the end of the day to make our debt service payments. Is generally, I say, like the top two pieces, but there's as you saw in the agreements, there's quite a few different other pieces that we're going to apply to.
If we could just sign that agreement that you described right there in the words you said, be fine with me. Let's do it.
All right, I think Director Weiner has asked questions for both of us, but I think the gist of it, I understand what's happening. So thank you for the good presentation. Director Weiner, I think you said that was the last question. Perfect. I have none at this time, but thank you. Good presentation. Very exciting to see us towards the end of the spectrum there, the last square. So excited to bring this to the board in a couple of weeks. With that, Ms. Martinez.
Thank you. Next item are the reports on issues or matters pertaining to the work of the committee.
Director Weiner, do you have anything?
I think I mentioned the idea of, following Congress and getting pre-prepared should they act, which apparently they don't. But if they did, and there was money for us to have, I'd definitely like to be first in line for the money.
All right. I have no reports from my side. Next item, please.
Thank you. Last item is adjournment.
Perfect. Before we adjourn, Justin, want to give you the floor. Do you have any other questions, comments, or anything you want us to know or do?
No, I think, there's a few follow-up items that we're going to look into. Is just, I just want to reiterate what I took notes of, just make sure I got them, that there was some mention of municipal corporation in the agreements, and we were going to change that out to sanitary district because that's how we were formed. And then looking at providing a kind of a summary of risk and liability of these agreements. And I think that kind of goes into what Director Wynn was talking about, as well as asking for a high level, what are our obligations under these agreements? So we'll work on providing some of that information to the board meeting when we present. So hopefully we'll be able to address these questions preemptively, but in front of the whole board.
Thank you. Well, you all have done a really good job in this presentation and the previous ones as well. So thank you for that. I think it's moved us along very quickly. So thank you. All right. Unless there's anything else, then we will adjourn. It's 12:59. Give you 1 minute back to your lives. Unless
Good night. Good night. Good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.